We're going to go to Phyllis Bennis, who is a fellow of the Institute for Policy Studies here in Washington, D.C. She is also author of Understanding Palestine and Israel. Thank you very much for being here. First of all, if we can just start talking with the executive orders. I mean, how much legal pushback are you expecting here? Is Donald Trump going to have it all his own way?
No, there's already enormous levels of mobilization and organization to push back against these executive orders, many of which were discussed in his speech today, which was a rather extraordinary explanation of his view of the grievances of this country that he put forward, and then how he will end the grievances. And in doing so, he asserted a level of support for empire and power that's really quite extraordinary, even for him. I mean, really talking about a return to manifest destiny. And when we talk about an imperial presidency, this time around, he's talking about really going back to expanding the territory of the United States, something quite inexplicable, I think, in terms of what the rest of the world will think about this. Talking about expanding our territory, carrying our flag into new horizons, including, of course, manifest destiny into space. But this talk of empire as a solution, the specifics, of course, through the executive orders, but in this broad articulation of his vision of the next 4 years, it's quite frightening, I think, on a global level as well as here in the United States.
Yeah, just on foreign policy, because we have heard from a number of foreign leaders, including the presidents of Ukraine and Russia. They have both weighed in. Let's just have a listen to what they had to say.
We can achieve security for ourselves and everyone in Europe. Now there is a good chance for this after the inauguration of the new US President, Donald Trump. He is a strong man. I wish President Trump and all of America success. Ukrainians are ready to work together with the Americans to achieve peace, real peace. This is a chance.
The pre-election period has been difficult for Mr. Trump in every way. He and even members of his family were constantly under severe pressure. There were even attempts on his life, but he showed the courage to win in a convincing manner. We see the statement of the newly elected President of the United States and members of his team about the desire to restore direct contacts with Russia that were interrupted not by us, but by the outgoing administration.
As we know, Donald Trump said he was going to end the war on day one. Clearly, it's not going to be that simple. I mean, how difficult is the issue of the Ukraine war going to be for Trump, and how do you think he's going to handle it?
Well, I think we still don't know how he intends to handle it, whether he will cut off all military support, as he has threatened on some occasions, whether he will continue levels of military support. He has claimed that he could end the war in Ukraine in one day. And that apparently had something to do with he would call the two leaders and they would both be so intimidated by him that they would do whatever he said. That's probably not exactly how it's going to happen. So I don't think we actually know what his intention is. But I do think that he's dealing with a situation which is no longer the top headline in foreign policy in the United States. It's been usurped certainly by the crisis in Gaza, where the question of the role of U.S. military support, the $17 billion direct military aid, the additional $4.5 billion in supporting U.S. troops directly on the ground to support Israel, and seeing the genocide that has resulted, that, of course, has become a much bigger issue for public opinion, public policy assumptions here in the United States. How he intends to deal with that beyond claiming credit for the ceasefire, which just went into effect, we still don't know. We don't know if he will even increase the level of military aid or whether he'll cut it back.
We've been talking a lot lately over the last several days in regards to the ceasefire deal. When it comes to phase two, many people in Benjamin Netanyahu's own cabinet and in his own party even want the war to continue in Gaza after phase one, the first 6 weeks of the war is finished. Many say that Israel has the blessing of Donald Trump to do so, to continue the war in Gaza. What do you make of that? And do you think that Trump has indeed given his blessing for the war to continue?
I think there's a very significant danger that he has given that green light. We don't have a text of something he said directly to Netanyahu in the phone call that they had about 3-4 weeks ago, which was a call that they both said was a very important call and a very friendly and strategic call. But we also have seen no indication that from Trump or from his envoys that he intends to pressure Israel in any way to go forward with phase 2. As we know, the negotiations for phase 2 won't begin for another 2 weeks. When they do, it's going to be very difficult because although Netanyahu is, of course, under enormous pressure at home to get any kind of a deal necessary to bring home all the rest of the hostages. And that's going to not happen until phase 2. If he refuses to go forward into phase 2, which means a virtually full withdrawal of Israeli troops from all of Gaza, including the parts that Netanyahu has said he will not give up, the Netzarim corridor and the Philadelphia corridor. If he goes ahead with withdrawing troops from those two areas, he will almost certainly lose enough people in his government to call for new elections, and it's unlikely he would win new elections. We do know that the opposition, some of which also supports continuing the war after the hostages have been brought home, may well support him. So it's very uncertain how that would play out in the domestic electoral situation inside Israel. But what we do know is that the statements that Trump has made, there will be hell to pay if the hostages are not released. He has not, for example, said there will be hell to pay if Israel does not allow in 600 trucks a day of humanitarian aid.
Yes.
He has not said there will be hell to pay if Israel does not stop bombing. The hell to pay seems to be reflected only if he doesn't like what the Palestinian side, the Hamas side, carries out.
Indeed.
So there's a serious danger that he may well have given some agreement to Netanyahu, either or for agreement that he could go back to war, or perhaps some agreement that further settlement, a massive expansion of settlement in the West Bank and perhaps parts of Gaza, would not be opposed by the United States, that the U.S. would defend Israel's illegal expansion or annexation of more territory. Any of those are possible.
And that's been what many people have feared could potentially happen. We're just looking at live pictures of Donald Trump finally entering the Capital One Arena in Washington, D.C., where he is due to speak. We will take that live as and when he does. But I want to talk about America's allies, traditional allies, because the French President, Emmanuel Macron, has called for the European Union to wake up as Donald Trump was inaugurated. Let's just listen in to Emmanuel Macron now.
What will we do in Europe tomorrow if our American ally withdraws its warships from the Mediterranean? If they send their fighter jets from the Atlantic to the Pacific? These are scenarios that we need to prepare for.
Donald Trump's first term was not really marked by great relations with either the EU or NATO countries. Phyllis, what do you make of this response from Macron, and is it likely to find support at the moment?
Well, I think there are certain parts of Trump's speech today that reflected some of that concern, which is the primacy of the U.S. antagonism towards China and the militarization of that relationship on the part of the United States. Trump is consistent with what has been largely the Biden administration's foreign policy as well, to see the relationship with China as the most problematic, more than with Russia, more than with Iran, certainly more than Israel-Palestine. So in that context, he made clear that that was his primary, strategic focus. On the other hand, the tone of his talk of empire and reclaiming his colonial empire, the spirit of the frontier, America's decline is over, all of that speaks to greater militarization, perhaps in further areas around the world, which could include maintaining a strong military presence even further in the Mediterranean, elsewhere in and around Europe, as well as in the Pacific, aiming at China. He talked about being a peacemaker and a unifier, but the rest of what he said really did not reflect that kind of a claim. He made a much clearer claim when he talked about taking the U.S.'s rightful place as the greatest, most powerful country in the world, when he talked about unilateral changes to the name of the Gulf of Mexico, for example, to the Gulf of America instead, restoring the traditional really imperial name of Mount Denali in Alaska to Mount McKinley. And then, of course, threatening that he could send troops against Panama to reclaim, as he puts it, the Panama Canal. All of those are very dangerous kinds of military threats. So to the degree that Macron's concern is that Trump is not likely to be as militaristic as the Biden administration or earlier administrations, I think that fear is misplaced. If his fear is that more of the military will be going towards China and less towards Europe at various points in time, that could be more realistic.
OK, thank you so much, Phyllis. We really do appreciate your insight into so many different issues that Donald Trump has already thrown up, and we're only a few hours into his second term as president. That is Phyllis Bennis, Fellow of the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much.